The TDSB wants to make sure that every school is a great school. All students should enjoy the classes that they take and should feel that their school is helping them get where they want to go in life.
The board looks at how things are going in schools and, when needed, reviews its policies and procedures to make sure that the system is working in the best way possible.
The optional attendance policy used to outline how students could choose to attend schools other than their local home school. The policy needed updating, and it was decided that specialized schools and programs needed their own separate policy document. This new policy outlines the creation of local specialized programs, the admissions criteria for all specialized schools and programs, the application processes for these programs and how they are communicated, and how these changes are aligned with the equity priorities of the TDSB. Community schools should offer courses and programs that students are interested in taking. Schools can run local specialized programs where a school or group within the school has a specific focus. There are more local specialized programs at the elementary level, like the Health and Wellness Academies. All local specialized programs will have clear admissions criteria posted online for local families to see and can be accessed by students attending that school.
The staff and students at ABC Secondary School want to have an environmental focus. The science and geography departments are excited to teach their grade 9 courses with an emphasis on ecology and sustainability. The English department has researched essays and literature with the environment as a key theme. A new environmental action club has been initiated with plans to take the school from Silver Eco School status to Gold. The science department will be offering grade 11 environmental science next year, and geography will be offering resource management the following year.
The staff and community at EFG Collegiate have already been developing student leadership within the school. While the initial work was done by the phys ed department, other departments are embracing a different approach to student-centered learning. There are school-wide leadership days for grade 9 students, and grade 10 students will be going on a 3-day student-led retreat. The grade 12 recreation leadership course partners with the local elementary schools throughout the year. The students have also developed a peer mentoring program and a peer tutoring program. The next step will be to apply to have a nonprofit SHISM or Specialist High Skills major at the school.
There are already specialized programs in schools available to all students living in Toronto. These schools and programs have been approved by the TDSB and are listed on the TDSB website. Specialized programs consist of at least 7 courses focused on a particular area. Specialized schools have an area of focus that applies to an entire school. With the new policy, students will still be able to apply to 2 board-wide specialized programs or schools. All applications will be processed using a centralized online application system.
Board-wide specialized programs and schools are expected to have clear, consistent admissions criteria which promote equity, inclusion, and human rights, and those criteria must be posted on websites. Work is already underway to look at how students are selected for these programs and to remove barriers like application fees and other accessibility issues.
Moving forward, the board will review and manage the number of programs and their locations. As part of the secondary program review, new programs or schools may be created, or existing programs or schools may be moved to ensure that students in all areas of Toronto are able to access these specialized programs.
It will take several years for the board to start to right-size schools by moving or changing programs. There will be future meetings and consultation sessions about the secondary program review and the possible moves or changes that might take place in the future.
Not all of our high school students have had access to the programs that they need. We are looking to make changes to maximize access to programming options for all students.
It's important that all students are able to access the programs that will help them be the most successful in school.
Created using Powtoon.
Good evening. We're just going to get started in 1 minute. Thank you. Okay, good evening. We are going to get started at this time. Thank you for joining us. We are here to share information about a new draft policy in the Toronto District School Board. This presentation will provide you with some background on the specialized schools and programs in our board, and we will walk through the policy statements that we have developed to affirm our commitment to specialized schools and programs, and to ensure that the school board offers a range of program opportunities for all of our students. In way of announcement, this meeting is being recorded. Next slide, please. We acknowledge that we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people. I also recognize my role as a settler to intentionally dismantle oppressive structures and practices that have been part of our history, and to ensure that the enduring presence of Aboriginal peoples and voices is heard in our nation. Thank you. Next slide, please. So good evening. My name is Lorraine Linton. I'm the System Superintendent of Secondary Programs and Admissions. Just wanted to walk through a few things around our presentation tonight. If you click on the CC button at the bottom of the Zoom screen, you will view the closed caption. It may not be perfect, but we would like to offer this as some help for those that may prefer this method of listening. Interpretation is available to those that have requested in the requested languages. Thank you for joining us. We will have a question and answer period where we may address some of your questions in this presentation, but we will be addressing Q&A later on in the session. You can add questions in the Q&A button during the presentation, or you may choose to input that toward the end. Thank you so much. At this time, I just want to read over on the next slide, please, is our code of conduct. All participants in virtual public consultations are expected to maintain meeting decorum and abide by the requirements of the Board Code of Conduct, PR 585, the Code of Online Conduct, PR 571. Discrimination and harassment will not be tolerated. Participants exhibiting inappropriate conduct will be removed from the virtual public consultation by TDSB staff. Okay, next slide, please. And those are the opening pieces. I'd like to introduce some staff at this time so that you know the team that's behind us in having this conversation tonight. First, I'd like to ask, as you're being introduced, if you could please allow your video to show yourself so that those that are participating with us can see you. Craig Snyder, Associate Director, Business Operations and Service Excellence. Andrew Gowdy, System Planning Officer. Dan Castaldo, Senior Manager, Planning. Dan Sivtikanin, Communications Officer. Amy Presley, Research Coordinator. Denny Farr, Policy Officer. Reiko Fuentes, Centrally Assigned Principal, Secondary Program and Admissions. And of course, myself, and thank you so much for those that were able to show yourself on the screen. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, our agenda for this evening. You've heard the introductions and the agenda from me. Next, we're going to hear from Craig Snyder, who will give a welcome. The context and background information will come from Dan Castaldo. The specialized schools and programs policy, so the key elements of this will come from Reiko Fuentes. Of course, we'll have what we have heard so far from back to me, and then we're going to have a facilitated question and answer time, facilitated by the group, Andrew Gowdy, Amy Presley, Denny Farr, and Dan Siftikanine. We're going to close with how to provide feedback and next steps. So tonight, we are looking forward to hearing your voice on the final processes that we are going through. And we want to thank you again for joining. Next slide, please. At this time, I'd like to introduce Associate Director Craig Snyder, who will provide some welcoming comments. Craig.
Thank you, Lorraine, and good evening, everybody. On behalf of the senior team and the director, I'd like to thank you for joining us tonight to review the specialized school and program policy. We welcome you all to our webinar platform, and those who have called in or those who are signed in with interpreters. As we begin the consultation several months ago, it was stopped when the world incurred the pandemic, and we are reconvening this work now and look forward to spending time together. As Lorraine and the team will talk to you tonight, this is the first of 3 consultations that will take place on the topic. On the second and third are taking place on Monday, November 22nd. Tonight you'll hear, as Lorraine said, from a variety of staff, and we look forward to hearing from you your thoughts and answering questions, because your voice is important as we develop this new policy and procedure. So thank you for spending the time with us tonight, and we appreciate hearing your feedback and thoughts as we work through this process together. And I'll turn it back to Lorraine now.
Thank you, Associate Director Snyder, for your comments. What's up now is the policy consultation. Just a way of reminder that the policy is the statement or of intent. It's a governing principle or end result adopted by the board in public and intended to guide future actions. In terms of the operational procedures, this is a document that's issued through the Director of Education governing the implementation of board policy, legislative requirements, and it's a government directive or the system operational requirements. The operational procedures, really, it's an intent, it's the process-oriented document to explain how governing policy requirements must be implemented. So tonight we're talking about the policy, but we wanted to also frame that following the policy will be procedures that will be written in support of a policy, provided that the steps that we follow are approved through the board channels. Okay, next slide, please. At this time, I'd like to introduce Dan Castaldo, Senior Manager, Planning, who will be giving us the context and all the background information that'll help us in this conversation tonight. Dan.
Thank you, Lorraine. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. So just before we get into the key elements of the draft policy, it's important to review a bit of the background and context to familiarize or perhaps refamiliarize ourselves with some of the steps that have led us to this point. So equitable access to programs and opportunities within the board has been a long-standing issue for many communities. And there's been quite a ramp that has led us to where we are in terms of addressing those gaps through the secondary program review. The draft specialized schools and programs policy that's being shared this evening is part of that work and builds upon a number of key strategic initiatives and milestones, starting with the integrated equity framework. And this was a multi-year action plan from 2016 that aligned the operations and organizational culture of the TDSB with the board's equity vision. This was followed by the report of the Enhancing Equity Task Force. This was in December 2017. And it was an extensive engagement with many of our parents and our students and brought many of the systemic barriers around access and opportunities to the surface. The report outlined a series of recommendations to support students, especially those that have been traditionally underserved or marginalized. It also identified specific areas of focus that included strong neighborhood secondary schools. Following that was the director's response to the Enhancing Equity Task Force report. This was in 2018. And it brought forward a series of directions that aligned with the board's principles of equity and was centered in a commitment to ensure that all students have the right tools, resources, access, and opportunities that they need to thrive. and also ensuring that these opportunities and experiences were available and offered to everyone. And all of these initiatives led to the formation of the board's multi-year strategic plan. And this document was approved by our board in October 2018. And really, it sets the direction for all of our work and identifies a set of broad system goals to support all students. It's underpinned by an objective of ensuring that every student receives a great education by having equitable access to programs and resources, along with increased opportunities that lead to success. The multi-year strategic plan is supported by a series of action plans that lay the groundwork for transforming student learning. This included updating the guiding principles of our long-term program and accommodation strategy to align with the board's commitments to equity and access. And that brought us to the secondary program review in 2019. And this was one of the action plans to support the multi-year strategic plan. And essentially, it's a review of all secondary schools, programs, policies, and procedures to ensure that all students have equitable access to rich programs and opportunities as close to home as possible. And this really forms the vision for secondary schools right across the board. The optional attendance policy review also began in 2019 as part of the secondary program review. And the optional attendance policy, as you've heard, it allows students to apply to schools other than their designated school by home address. And this has been in place since amalgamation. The policy review began in late 2019, and the revised version of the policy will be presented to trustees in the new year for approval. The specialized schools and programs policy, this process began in early 2020. And through the optional attendance policy review, it was determined that specialized schools and programs really did require their own context and set of principles, which led to the approval of a work plan in January of 2020 to develop the policy. And we are bringing that to the public for feedback and insight tonight. We began the consultation process in the spring of 2020, but as you've heard, that consultation was put on hold due to the global pandemic. Next slide, please. So the following guiding principles of the policy were developed from the recommendations of the Enhancing Equity Task Force, the director's response to the report, and of course, our multi-year strategic plan, specifically the commitment to providing equity of access to learning opportunities for all students. And within these guiding principles, you'll see many of the themes that align with the context and the background that I've just presented, and they include a commitment to strong local secondary schools, the provision of accessible programming, ensuring that we respond to student voices and choices, to increasing opportunities for our students, and promoting equity, inclusion, and human rights. Next slide, please. So as we saw on the previous slide, the secondary program review, the revised optional attendance policy, and the new specialized schools and programs policy work are all very, very interconnected initiatives. And this diagram is one way to demonstrate the alignment of these initiatives and how they're working together to move the system toward the vision for secondary schools in the TDSB. The first step was to establish the vision for secondary programming in the board, which I have described, and it's shown on this slide in the top left quadrant of the circle, and that's in the darkest shade of blue. And to move our system forward, the optional attendance and specialized schools and programs policies need to reflect and support the vision for secondary schools in the TDSB. And this is the work that we're currently doing. And the insights and feedback that we receive from our communities will be an asset to that process. We're also going to begin the work to right-size the secondary school system. Part of the challenge we're experiencing is that there are simply too many buildings and too much available space within our schools. And this has led to a lengthy period of choice and competition among our schools. And this has unfortunately led to significant imbalances and inequities across the system that need to be addressed. The board has approved a plan that will focus our work over the next few years on addressing the small collegiates that exist across our system. Our neighborhood collegiates should be destinations that offer a breadth of programming for all students, but some have very small enrollments that don't allow for the same range of opportunities that a larger school can offer. So we're going to be conducting a series of 8 pupil accommodation reviews over the next 3 years, where clusters or groups of schools across the city will be reviewed, and where some schools within those clusters could be recommended for closure. Each of these pupil accommodation reviews will include opportunities for further public engagement. So once we have the appropriate policy framework in place and we're moving forward with the work to right-size our system, we can also begin to analyze where the gaps exist in terms of access to programs and opportunities right across the city. And that's represented by the bottom left quadrant of this circle on the slide. So we'll be able to assess where the imbalances are, where the inequities are, and then to develop strategies and plans to address those gaps. So now I'm going to turn it back to Raiko to take us through the next part of this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, for sharing that. And just before Raiko comes up, we're going to reset our slide deck because we noticed that there are several lines, and just to let this slide stay there just for a moment so that you can see it without the lines. Thank you. Back to you, Raiko.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Lorraine. So I'm going to be walking us through the key elements of the draft policy. So firstly, what are specialized schools and programs? The TDSB has a number of specialized schools and programs across the city. Each specialized school or program has a particular area of focus. At the elementary level, we have the various academies, cyber arts programs, programs for high-performing athletes, as well as arts-focused programs in schools. There are currently over 30 specialized programs in our secondary schools, such as the International Baccalaureate Program, Elite Athletes, arts-focused programs, specialized programs in math, science, and technology, in addition to 3 specialized schools. Special education, gifted, and French immersion are not considered specialized programs and do not fall under the scope of this policy. As Dan mentioned earlier, specialized schools and programs used to be included in the optional attendance policy. The decision was made that a separate policy and set of procedures outside of optional attendance were needed in order to establish clearer and more consistent admissions procedures, practices, and timelines. The policy was drafted in March 2020, and earlier rounds of consultation were held with the public. And now we are conducting the final phase of consultation, and we've worked very actively to engage as many community members as possible in this process. So what is different in this policy? The new policy distinguishes between 2 types of specialized programs: district or board-wide specialized programs and local specialized programs. Let's start by talking about district or board-wide schools and programs. Our current system of specialized schools and programs is what we are now describing in this policy as district or board-wide, as these programs are available to students from across the board. There's no assigned catchment or attendance area. These are schools or programs with a specific focus, such as the arts, athletics, STEM, or skilled trades. Admission priority goes to the students who live in the City of Toronto. Only if all City of Toronto students have been offered placement will students from outside the City of Toronto be considered. Next, these schools and programs will have standardized admission processes and criteria established by the board. For example, if we have 5 different schools that offer the International Baccalaureate Program, we want to make sure that the admissions process to these schools is the same, so that students from across the city will have the same chance of getting in. The board will establish admissions criteria that promote equity, inclusion, and human rights. We are currently working on a centralized online application tool, which will help standardize our process across the city and ensure consistency. The online tool will be designed to streamline the application process and will hopefully reduce anxiety for students and families, which is sometimes created through our current paper application process. The application process can now also be separated from the current optional attendance process. The board will determine the number, the scope, the location of these district-wide programs. We will need to take into account what schools currently have space to offer district-wide programs, what the facilities are like, where specialized program opportunities are needed, and where we face enrollment pressure. As with the current process, students will still be able to apply to 2 specialized schools or programs. If a school offers more than 1 district-wide specialized program or multiple streams within a program, for example, in the arts, each program will require a separate application. Students can only participate in 1 specialized program at a time, with the exception of the Specialist High Skills Major, or SHSM programs, where students can pursue the various components of the SHSM program alongside with their other courses of study. To learn more about SHSM programs, please visit the TDSB website. Finally, transportation will not be provided for district or board-wide programs, as is the case with our current policy for optional attendance. Let's now take a look at the second type of specialized program, which we will refer to as local specialized programs. Like district or board-wide programs, local specialized programs have a specific focus, such as the arts, athletics, math, science, and technology, or skilled trades. However, these are available only to students registered at that local school. We want local schools to respond to student voice, choice, and interest of its students, and to develop programs to meet these needs. Schools can design local specialized programs with a wide variety of areas of interest. The school principal will establish the admissions processes and criteria in consultation with school staff, the superintendent, and central departments. And like district board-wide programs, the admission criteria will promote equity, inclusion, and human rights. One of the major differences between the district or board-wide and local specialized programs is the admission process. The admissions process will begin after the student has registered at the school. In other words, students apply to the school and then are considered for the local specialized program. How is this different from the current system of specialized schools or programs? Specialized schools and programs that currently exist will be identified as being either district or board-wide or local programs. Moving forward, new programs that are established will also be identified as either district or board-wide or local. Can a student apply to both a district or board-wide school or program and a local program? All students can apply to district or board-wide schools or programs. There is no catchment area, and these programs are available to all students in the City of Toronto. For local specialized programs, however, only students registered at the local school can apply. You'll need to have signed up for the school already to be considered for the local specialized program. Oh, my dog says hi. Sorry. Can a student apply to a local specialized program through optional attendance? Well, this would depend on the optional attendance status of the school. Schools are identified as either being limited or closed to optional attendance. Closed schools cannot accept students through optional attendance. Limited schools can accept some students on optional attendance. A student can apply to limited schools through optional attendance. However, the admission process to the local specialized program at that school will not commence until after the student is accepted and registered at the school. Let's look at some examples of local specialized programs. Many schools have special and unique programs available to the students attending the school. As mentioned, Specialist High Skills Majors, or SHSMs, are programs focused on an economic sector that run in grade 11 and 12, and they are running in over 50 of our secondary schools. There are student leadership programs in some of our schools, as well as laws, the law in action within schools, the Cisco Nortel networking, to name but a few. Advanced placement courses are also offered in many schools for students in grade 11 and grade 12 who are interested. How would a school initiate a new local specialized program? The steps required to start a new specialized program will be outlined in the procedure document that will be developed in the upcoming months. Local schools are encouraged to respond to student voice, choice, and interest, and develop programs to meet the needs of their students. How will you be standardizing the admissions process to specialized schools and programs? The board will be working to establish admissions practices that are consistent for each type of specialized school or program, and that the set criteria are clearly communicated to families. Work also needs to be done to ensure that admissions practices are free from barriers that might prevent some students from applying, or criteria that might make it harder for some students to be accepted than others. Will existing specialized programs be identified as local specialized programs? Many of our existing specialized programs will be identified as district or board-wide programs, for example, art schools or elite athlete programs. Some existing programs may be deemed local specialized programs, available only to students from within the local population. This decision will be made in consultation with the local school principal, the school superintendent, and central departments, such as planning. Why would an existing specialized program be identified as a local specialized program? Well, first, some of our schools have many more students than can be accommodated. In order to provide the best experience possible for all students, we may need to limit acceptance into some programs, as the school must be able to provide programming for its local students. Also, in some schools, students from the local neighborhood do not benefit from the specialized program at all, because all spaces are given to out-of-area students. We want to create an opportunity for local students to benefit from the program and encourage enrollment in the local school. What would be the impact on existing students of a specialized program or school if a change like this is made? Students already enrolled in a program would continue in the program until graduation or until program completion. It's important to note that changes would only impact future grades. Lastly, when would these changes occur? Well, the first step is to finalize the new policy. Staff will then develop the operational procedures as to how this policy will be put into practice. It's our intent to have both this policy and the updated optional attendance policy in place for the fall of 2022, just under 1 year from now, so that schools will be following the standardized admissions practices for students applying for admission in high school in September 2023. And I'm going to hand this back to System Superintendent Lorraine Linton.
Thank you, Reiko, for going over the integral elements of the policy draft that we're talking about tonight. Can I ask, I just want to pause for just one moment to allow our team of interpreters just to catch up a bit, because that was a bit of content, and I just want to make sure that we honor the work that they're doing tonight as well. So just one moment, we'll be right with you. Reiko, would you be able to move to the next slide for us, please? So tonight we've heard from Associate Director Snyder that due to COVID, we've paused the consultations, and so we're starting them again tonight, and we're glad that you're here. We've also heard about policies and procedures, just in way of review. Dan Castaldo spoke about the vision of the secondary program review and the 4 components that are related to that large system review that will be taking place. And Reiko Fuentes shared the intricacies of the draft specialized schools and program draft policy. So I just want to focus on this quadrant that Dan had already shared, which really talks about the optional attendance and the specialized schools and programs policies. This is the quadrant that we're focusing on this evening, again, in developing the policies with public consultation, along with the accompanying procedures. And I think one of our goals is to ensure that this policy is written in a way that allows for greater access of our students to programming. And we want to, again, share that your input is valuable. So on our next slide, we want to share with you some of what we have already heard so far. So what we've heard so far. So from earlier consultation, we heard overwhelmingly from families, students who were in specialized schools and programs about the benefits of the focused learning opportunity. We're going to share two quotations that came in from that earlier consultation. I am happy to see a commitment to continuing to provide specialized schools. They are a huge benefit to students. My son was not engaged in school before moving to the art-based school. It has made all the difference in his life and has turned his prospects around. Next slide, please. My daughter attends Claude Watson program at Earl Haig Secondary School. The program and curriculum has been outstanding for her and has changed her educational experience and overall engagement in school. I believe these specialized programs are essential, and she is already planning out her future courses and thinking of university direction. I agree the applications and programs should be accessible to students. Next slide, please. We also heard from many that not all students and families are able to gain access to these rich and valuable programs and schools. Again, we're going to share a few quotations from what we received. I feel strongly that specialized programs should not exist in a public school system. It takes the elite and high achievers out of the regular classroom, thus being in direct contrast with the inclusion model. It then leaves classes filled with a skewed number of students with socio-emotional and or academic issues, leaving less instructional time for the regular everyday child. And the second quotation, I think the opportunity for specialized program offered in Scarborough region is biased, inconsistent, no transparency, and not inclusiveness. Equal opportunity has to be provided to all children who want to do the program. Some children are only aware of the program in grade 8. However, the screening processes involves grade 7 report cards. Competition is too harsh. My child applied to 3 programs, and all 3 programs in 3 schools got denied. And this is a child who's getting 85% average on core subjects. Next slide, please. So disproportional representation in specialized schools and programs. So there are disproportions among students' identity groups across Toronto District School Board, specialized schools and programs. So students who self-identify as Black, Middle Eastern, Latin, and Indigenous are underrepresented in specialized schools and programs. Students with special education needs, not gifted, are underrepresented in specialized schools and programs. So at this time, we want to talk about, here we can see example income levels, parental education. There are things that are affecting the disproportional level of representation for our students. And again, it brings us back full circle to why we're here tonight, is to hear your input on the draft policy. So at this time, we are going to move to our question and answer time. I know that the team behind the scenes have tried to answer several questions, but some of these questions that may not have been answered will be facilitated through System Planning Officer Andrew Gowdy, who will be leading us through the Q&A time with the panelists that you've already met. I want to thank you in advance for your input. We look to engage with you further in the Q&A time. And I also want to thank the community advisory councils for their commentary and the consultation we had with them as it related to how to best ensure input of all voices at these sessions, not only tonight, but over the next several days until we get to the survey deadline on December the 17th. So I'd like to pass it over now to System Planning Officer Andrew Gowdy to lead us in the question and answer time. Andrew?
Thank you, Lorraine. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name's Andrew Gowdy, and I'll be facilitating the feedback component of this session. So now is the time that we want to hear from you. We want to hear your questions. We want to hear your comments on the proposed policy. Next slide, please. There's several ways for you to participate. So if you're on a computer or a smart device, you can communicate with us through the Q&A feature. It's an icon at the bottom of your Zoom window. And if you click on the Q&A, then you can type in your question or your comment to us. You can also choose to speak directly to us, and that's by clicking on the raise hand icon, also in the toolbar at the bottom of the Zoom window. And when you click on the raise hand icon, we as the host will see in the attendees column, we'll see your name, and we'll see a hand appear by your name, and we will turn to you sequentially and ask you to unmute yourself and to speak. If you're joining us by phone, you also have an opportunity to speak directly to us, and that's by pressing *9. And by doing that, we will see your phone number in the attendee list, and we'll see a hand appear by your phone number, and we will, in sequence, turn to you and ask you to unmute and speak. And to unmute on the phone, it's pressing *6. Next slide, please. We'd just like to remind you of the norms for today's discussion. In the TDSB, we do have a code of online conduct, and discrimination and harassment will not be tolerated. Participants exhibiting inappropriate conduct will be removed from the meeting. Please be respectful, courteous with your questions and feedback. We'd like to hear as many voices as possible tonight. Each speaker is asked to be mindful that others want to speak. And if you have more than one comment, please raise your hand again or type into the Q&A. Please minimize background audio if you choose to speak. And lastly, we'd like to remind you that this session is being recorded. So I can see, can you just flip to the next slide, please? So we do have a number of hands raised, and we have questions coming in through the Q&A. And so I'm going to go back and forth between the hands raised and the Q&As. We have Amy, who is monitoring the Q&A. And when we turn to Amy, Amy's going to read out questions or comments, but we'll begin with the hands up. So the first attendee who will be speaking is Elka Patel. I've just asked you to unmute. Elka, you can go ahead.
Hi, good evening. How are you guys?
Well, thanks.
Yeah, I would like to ask you, like, my son is on grade 4, and is it in count as a secondary? Because I received the email and he was like gifted, but just for few percentile, he just lose that. He got like in 96% on the gifted school. Sorry, gifted like a CCAT exam.
So thank you for that question, Elka. If the question is about gifted programming, that's not part of the policy that's under review right now. Gifted is part of the programs that we offer under special education. So specialized schools and programs, that's the policy that we're discussing tonight. Examples of specialized school would be the schools for the arts, or schools that focus in science, technology, and mathematics. So not gifted.
Yeah, so like a teacher recommended, like he is very skilled, like he can go the specialized program. So I am wondering, like, he is eligible for like is it in grade 4? So is it eligible for specialized program?
So as an elementary student, we do have some specialized schools at the elementary level. We do have schools like Faywood and Fairmount that offer arts-based curriculums. We also have some schools that offer programming in sports and wellness, but most of the specialized programs are at the secondary level. So when your child is in grade 8, that's when you'll want to be determining what specialized schools and programs might be of interest to your child.
Okay, because I got the email from TDSB, so I wasn't sure like but that whoever took the gifted exam, she was saying like he is eligible for like a specialized program. That was her name is Miss Dad, Lauren Dad. I can't remember exact, but like a Dad. Maybe you guys knows about it.
Okay, well, thank you for coming and listening and participating tonight, because this is about planning for the future, and your child will be attending secondary programming in the future. So we do want to know your thoughts as a parent, but it's not something that your child would be applying to right now.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the second attendee with their hand up is Rajender Chauhan. Could you please unmute yourself?
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah, hi. And first of all, thank you for arranging this meeting. And my question is, my son is in 6th grade, and I receive an email for a Cloud Watson Art School for optional attendance. So, that school is around 5 to 6 kilometers from my residence. So, and I talked to in current school, and they say that like transportation won't be provided. So that's really hard for me to arrange pick up and drop for him. So if a school board is doing something in that way, and also he's more interested in science or math specialized program. So that's why I'm in kind of a dilemma, could not decide whether we should pick that option or not.
Well, thank you very much for those thoughts. So right now, specialized schools and programs do not have transportation provided, but it's very helpful for us to hear that transportation is a challenge for parents to access programs. And distribution of the programs and accessibility to them, that's one of the foci of the policy and our review. It's helpful to know also that as a parent of an elementary child, your child's interested in programs in science and technology. So thank you for sharing that.
Right. And also, may I get some list of those schools which has the science and technology program in my area, so that can I apply for that for the next year or next session?
So we do have information on specialized schools and programs on the board's public website. So TDSB, short for Toronto District School Board. So tdsb.on.ca is the way to access our main page. And the easiest way to see the list of specialized schools and programs is going to find your school, which is an option at the top of the page. And once you click on find your school, then you will come to a page that allows you to search for a school by address, but there's also options on the left-hand side, a column. And there's features such as alternative schools, French programs, but there's also specialized schools and programs, and you can click there and you can see a list of all the program offerings.
Okay, yeah, that is what I want. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Rajender. The third person with their hand up is Imaid Ekhator. Imaid, could you unmute yourself, please? Okay, I'm not sure if the unmute is working at this point. So we'll come back to Ahmed. I'm going to go to the next person, and that's Leslie Graham. Leslie, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself now.
Hi there. Thanks for the presentation, and I commend the TDSB for doing this work. I have a comment and a question. First of all, is I think you need to do some work around how you advertise these programs, because as an immigrant to Canada, with 3 children in the system, I had no idea about half of these programs. I really do think that is, if you want to actually increase your people using these programs who are not Canadians, who don't know about them, then you really need to do some work there, because it is disappointing to hear about these programs when you have, my son is 16, I had no idea about the AP program, for example, or IB. So I think that's maybe some work you could do, and how you proactively look for children who are would do well in these programs. And my next question is really around the admissions criteria and how you can make that equitable so that it doesn't, advantage children whose parents, one, are aware of the programs, and who, like, for example, I'd heard about the Ursula Franklin program. It's in our neighborhood because it's the schools in our neighborhood, and children were having their parents write their essays and have the tutors to study for the exam. So how do you make sure that there are not barriers in place to children who would do well in these programs from actually getting into them?
Okay, thank you for that question, Leslie. Lorraine, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, Andrew, I can start, and then I will pass it on to Reiko Fuentes as well, just if you have anything to add, Reiko. Thank you for your comments, Leslie, with regards to particularly how parents are able to access the information. I know Andrew mentioned it earlier, but it's on the website, and it's not perhaps commonly known. So we do take that feedback quite seriously. For those that are participating in the webinar tonight, I just want to remind you that in the chat, that information is being the hyperlink is included. And while we're continuing the discussion, you may in fact wish to click on that hyperlink just to get a sense of some of the pieces that we're talking about as we go further. With a specific reference to the admissions criteria, we would absolutely unequivocally agree that we do need to, and that's part of the intent of the policy. How do we ensure that the admission practices in our specialized schools, and in fact, in many of our schools, do not, they create opportunities for students so that anyone who applies can get in. We have actually, we understand that the practices of the school that you referenced as it relates to Ursula Franklin have changed actually for this year. So we want to just give you a bit of a context, bit of an update on that, so that the information is perhaps more current to what's happening now. And I will pass that over to Reiko. And of course, Reiko, for you to add any other comments that you feel are appropriate. Thank you.
Thanks, Lorraine, and thank you, Leslie, for your question. You're identifying some of the exact concerns that are driving some of the work that we're doing. That we want to make sure that we have admissions criteria that are based on interest and passion in students. They shouldn't have to have tutors outside, and so some of the practices that are being reflected upon are the use of entrance exams or assignments or essays that are written as part of that application, how previous report cards are being used, especially how do you consider a student who might not have been in Canada in grade 7 and don't have an Ontario report card to provide. So there are many different barriers, and that's part of the work that we're doing to make sure that all students have equitable access to the application process and have opportunities. And as to your feedback as well, making sure that we are making the community aware of the different opportunities that exist, including the great opportunities that can be found in all of our local school programs as well.
Maybe just to add that I understand that Ursula Franklin Academy has completed their information night for this year, and some of the criteria regarding writing, etc., have been removed from the process for this year and going forward. So I just wanted to mention that to you, Leslie, so that you're aware. I don't know if that because I think your other comment was that you wish you had known about the opportunity because it's in your area. So for that, I do hear that comment, but I just wanted to mention to you that the Ursula Franklin Academy sort of entrance pieces have changed, and they're much they've changed, and they're aligning with best practices associated with equity focuses. So I just wanted to mention that to you so you're aware of their current work and how they're doing that.
Can you still hear me? Am I still okay?
Yep, you're still on.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you. I had heard about Ursula Franklin this year, which I was relieved about. But yeah, I really think working on going out to schools. I have a daughter in grade 8 now, and she hasn't heard about. She had ESA come out to talk to them, but you know, all these other programs for my son, I had no idea because I didn't grow up in the school system here, and I think there's a lot of people like me out there whose kids would benefit from these programs, and really, you know, proactively, even teachers, like, you know, identifying children who would do well. So it's not just the kind of, you know, nice white parent scenario of like, I mean, I know that sounds a bit controversial, but, you know, seeking out these visits, these school for their children so they get the advantage. So really trying to work around proactively and getting kids from all, you know, demographics and socioeconomic status into these schools would be great. So I'm glad to hear you're doing that. So I commend you and thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you very much for those comments, Leslie. Okay, we're going to go to one more raised hand, and then we're going to go to the Q&As, and we'll be asking Amy to see if there's some frequently asked questions, if there's a theme that's emerged that we can respond to. So the next raised hand is Indrani Chakraborty. Okay, so Indrani, I've just enabled you to speak, but I've been notified by Zoom that you're using an older version. And I have to promote you to panelist to allow you to talk. So one moment, please. Okay, Indrani, you're now able to speak. Can you unmute yourself, please? Okay, I'm not sure if Indrani has found the...
I'm sorry, I have my apologies. Hello.
Hi.
Good evening. So thank you for having me. I'm very excited to know all those programs. I always heard about the specialist program from my neighbors and stuff. So just one question. I'm hearing a lot of times optional attendance. So are all specialist programs considered as optional attendance?
So the board right now has a single policy called optional attendance, and that single policy describes how students would access a program when they live outside of that school's area. And so it applies to regular programs, specialized schools and programs, as well as alternative schools and French programs. What we've learned over the last couple of years in discussing the optional attendance policy is we should have a separate policy just about specialized schools and programs. And so that's what we're doing now, and that's what we're discussing tonight. It's a separate policy called specialized schools and programs, and this policy is going to have the rules for students to get admission to these special program offerings. And there's two types of specialized programs. There's district-wide ones. These are schools that have and programs that have no boundaries. Anybody who lives in the city of Toronto can apply to them and make their own way there. But then we've introduced a second type. That's called the local specialized program. And that one would only serve students who live in the school's boundary. Does that help answer some of your questions, Indrani?
Yes, so a little bit. So what I have understood that it doesn't matter which part we live. If my child is eligible, if I am, no, I can have him enrolled, right? in specialist program. It doesn't. So you said there another part, localized specialized program. It's still under optional attendance, right?
It'll be under a separate policy, not under that name optional attendance, but there will be an optional sense to it in that there isn't guarantees of admission to these things. Like the way the education system is structured in Toronto is there's always your local school, which guarantees a student admission. And then there's other options that students can choose from. And one of these other options are specialized schools. And that's the subject of tonight's policy.
Right. So my second question is, we heard a lot about equity and criteria of admission. So in a simple sense, what other criteria a student has to have to get admitted one of those specialist program other than having those specialized score or mark? I know this is like the most important things for them to, right? Is like there are only 2 top school here in Toronto and only 50 people get in. So the competition is fierce. As one of the parent already wrote in a quotation, not a lot of them. So how would you, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you're asking an excellent question. It's about admission criteria and how they could change with the specialized schools and program policy. Reiko, would you like to answer this question?
Absolutely. Thanks, Andrew. So currently, individual schools and specialized programs, they set their own criteria for admissions. And so you can find that information on the particular school or their program's website. And so it's going to be different from program to program. You've mentioned the TOPS programs, and yes, they are a very competitive program to get into. And right now, schools set their own criteria. And that might include previous report cards and marks, as you've mentioned. There might be an entrance exam. And that's the way it currently is this year. Part of the plan for moving forward in the first step is having the board will have a little bit more oversight around what those criteria are. And that we'll make sure that the criteria are focused in equitable access to the programs for our students, so that the criteria don't present barriers. Because we do know that there are limited spaces in the programs. Future work that will be happening as part of the secondary program review might be looking at new programs and making programs available in different areas of the city, because we know that there is demand and we know that students are interested. And also supporting schools and creating their own local specialized programs that, again, maybe are focused on math, science, and technology, like the TOPS program is, in different areas of the city. I hope that helps a bit, Indrani.
Yeah, thank you so much. Like, yeah, so it's not like end of the life if nobody gets in, someone doesn't get in top, there's still another one in local areas. So it's a bit of a hope that can still take you to EFT or where you want to go.
You don't have to be in a specialized program to get into a great university program. Every high school in the board provides excellent programming in all of the courses and all of the preparation that any student needs to apply to post-secondary plans, either in university, college, or heading into apprenticeship. Every student can get that same level of preparation in a regular program in their home school.
Thank you, both of you. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Indrani.
Thank you.
Well, we're going to go to Amy now in the Q&As. Amy, is there a frequently asked question? Is there a theme that we can respond to?
Yep, thanks, Andrew. So lots of folks are wondering if current specialized schools and programs will be moved or closed as a result of this policy.
Thanks for that, Amy. Lorraine, would you like to respond to this question?
Absolutely, I can help with that. So sorry, can I just get that question right again? I apologize, Amy. I just want to hear it was worded a particular way and I just need to answer that correctly. Thanks.
So if current specialized schools and specialized programs will be moved or closed as a result of this policy?
So this policy is about the work we're doing to facilitate access for students to specialized schools and programs. So in short, I would say it does not do that. However, the larger conversation, and you heard that came out in the infographic, the circle that was out, it showed the vision to help right-size schools. And some of that was about, Dan Castaldo had spoken about closing the small collegiates, because the optimal sizes of schools we're looking at are about 1,000. So this policy, to answer your question, no, it's not about, it's about how do we best serve our kids, our students, with the programming that's required. As part of the larger secondary review, that's perhaps where you're looking, and that would be perhaps part of a longer and a larger conversation, and it certainly wouldn't be immediate, meaning this year. So just to provide some clarity and a bit of a larger context. I hope that helps, but I certainly would defer to others from the panel who might add to that comment. Thanks.
Lorraine, I'm just going to add, I think one thing that could come as a result, and it was mentioned a little bit, that some of the specialized programs that are now considered board-wide specialized programs could become local specialized programs, where they would be supporting the students who are attending that school already in the catchment area. And that might be because a school is over capacity and there's enough demand from within the school itself to sustain the program.
Thanks for that addition. That's excellent, because that may be what the person was asking as well in their question, their Q&A. Thanks for that.
Okay, thank you, Lorraine and Reiko. Amy, how about we do one more question from the Q&A, and then we're back to the speakers list.
Yep, thanks, Andrew. So folks are wondering about the timeline for the policy and if it will be in place for this coming September.
Lorraine, would you like to answer that?
Absolutely. Thanks for the question. Yes, we're going to talk about that a little later. It's interesting because that's part of our exit to share. So you're anticipating where we're going. And so I can let you know that our goal is to, at the close of December 17th, when all the public consultation is closed, is to gather that information and to present a report in the winter cycle to the Governance and Policy Committee. So we're looking at the winter cycle being February, and to, of course, board for approval. With the approval of that policy, our procedures will follow, and this policy will be, provided it's the will of the board, it will be enacted in September. So September of 2022. And what that means is that all of our processes, the open houses, all of the information that parents receive will be governed by this new or these new policies, right? And so specialized schools and program for September 2022. Any student, therefore, in school in September applying to be in a specialized school would submit their requirements later in the year. They would know whether they're accepted. And then in the following year, September 2023, will be the first cohort of students that have gone through the full cycle of the open houses, the policy forms, etc., and they'll be starting school September 2023. So yes, just to give you a bit of a trajectory of the timelines. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you, Amy. We're back to the speakers list, and the next speaker is Bishwijit Paul. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Hi. So I have two questions actually. First question is, among the specialized program, I am not actually sure which program is best for my son because he wants to study future in health science. So I am not sure which programs suit for health science. Number one. Number two question, I'm living in Scarborough area near Lawrence and Bimley. So I heard that specialized program like TOPS and STEM program is too far near downtown area. So why it is not available in my area? Is there any plan in future in my area like TOPS or STEM program? Thank you.
Well, thank you for those comments, and it's good to hear the experience from the field about accessibility, and we're hearing comments from the Scarborough area. Reiko, would you like to comment on health sciences and access to these types of programs?
So thanks, Andrew. To your question, again, every high school in the board will provide all of the programming that's required to enter into the best health science programs that our universities have to offer. If your child is looking to follow a specialized program, the math, science, technology programs or the STEM programs, there's a focus and an emphasis on science. It's often integrated into all of their subjects and all of their courses. That may be an avenue that your child might want to pursue. And again, other local specialized programs like AP programming, so again, offering advanced placement courses in the senior grades, is offered in I think it's almost 40 of our secondary schools, and that would provide some extra challenge in working on some of that university curriculum while in high school. And again, you're going to find that if you look at the course offerings in any of the secondary schools across the board, whether they have a specialized program or not, they will offer all of the prerequisites for university programs and provide excellent foundation for students who are looking to go into health sciences, engineering sciences, any of those programs that are offered in the universities.
Okay, thank you, Reiko. We're getting many questions coming in. Many people want to speak. And so we're going to ask people just to ask one question or make one comment. So moving on to the next speaker, it's Iqbal Hashmi. Could you unmute, please, Iqbal?
Yeah, can you hear me, Andrew?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you so much. I just want to tell you that I know one of the participants said that students and parents are unaware of those programs. I was suggesting if you can send the guidance counselors from high school to beginning of grade 7, let the parents and students know that these programs exist, and they can work towards getting those programs and all the information. I think might be helpful. The other thing I want to mention is I know you're talking about expanding it and having more schools for local programs and for district and board-wide programs. How do you determine the number of students that are available in a particular area and provide them the programs that they need? Do you have like statistics you go by? How do you go by that and ensure that all students get into the programs that are willing to go into those programs?
Well, thank you for that question. And so this is a new policy and procedure that hasn't been implemented yet. And we've got a lot of work to do once it's approved by the board to figure out how to operationalize this. But the way that current specialized schools and programs work is they have a program that they've already established. They know the courses that they're offering in that program area. They have an optimal number of students to accept to support the programs that they've identified. The schools also have a physical building with limited number of spots. So it's a combination of looking at those things, the number of students required to support their program offering and the space that they have available in the building. And that's what determines the number that they target in the intake grade. For example, if the program accepts students in grade 9, they might know that they need 240 students across 4 grades to support the programs, and hence they're admitting 60 students in grade 9 to support that program across the 4 grades. Does that answer your question, Iqbal?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next person to speak is Michelle G. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Yes, I just did. Thank you. I appreciate the work that you're doing. This is the first time I'm hearing about the changes. I live in York Mills Collegiate area. I'm sorry, I don't know this off the top of my head, if we're eligible in more than one catchment area for high school. My daughter's in grade 6. She's definitely interested in the arts. And I hear that these programs are probably going to start 2022, 23 or 23, 24. But you said that if they're in the program, they're not going to be taken out. I'm just wondering, are the boundaries going to change if for localized, like if they go from district to localized, will they have wider boundaries, or is it just completely local? Because Earl Hague's very close to York Mills. Or are those schools that are so specialized, will they just stay district wide? Is that part of the stuff that you're determining, and what input can go into that? I'm just concerned, and even just that whole thing, it goes from grade 6 to 13. So there's possibly students who are in the grade 6 to 8 program they're not going to get into grade 9 to 13 because they don't, grade 9 to 12 because they don't live in the district if they switch. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yep. Yeah, thanks for that question, Michelle. So programs that remain district-wide, and there will be district-wide specialized programs still. Those programs have no boundary. They're open to anybody in the city of Toronto, and they'll have admission criteria to determine who gets in. But a program that gets deemed a local specialized program, it'll be that school's regular program boundary, its attendance area, that determines admission. And we don't foresee establishing another set of boundaries just for the local specialized programs, like an overlay of another set of boundaries. We don't foresee doing that. We foresee just having one set of boundaries. For example, Earl Hague has a regular program boundary, and that boundary would apply to the local specialized program should the program change at Earl Hague. But as long as programs stay as district-wide, then they are boundaryless and they're open to everybody in the city of Toronto.
So who determines the changes to district to local and all that kind of stuff? Like what kind of, you guys are deciding that now, right?
So this first step is establishing the policy. This is providing the framework that we then operationalize. So we're just at that stage of determining what we believe in as the Toronto District School Board. And this policy is saying we believe in offering specialized courses, and there's 2 models to offer them. There's the district-wide school or program, and then there's the local program. So this is establishing the framework that we then, as we go into the future over the next number of years, we'll be applying it. And that's where we'll be confirming what are the district-wide schools and programs and what are the local programs. It's hard for us to forecast right now how it's going to be applied.
Okay. I have one other quick comment, but I can put it in the Q&A if you like.
Sure, that's great. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving on, we're going to Michelle Zhang. Michelle, you're free to speak now.
Hi, thank you for organizing the meeting. My question is, those special programs, are they rotating the different school or they always stay in the same school? And then because what I think is a school close to us called St. John MacDonald, they used to have the MAC, but they don't have showing in the list in this year. So I'm wondering, is that particular reason those schools, they cannot continue to hold those programs, or is there any policy from the school board that they will manage those lists?
Thank you for those questions. Reiko, would you like to respond?
Sure, I'll see what I can do, Andrew. Michelle, when a specialized program is established in a secondary school, to my knowledge, it's there to stay. You're building a program, you're building the staff that are going to support it, the direction that the vision is for the school. So it's not that they pick up and move ad hoc from one area to another. There may have been programs that existed at one time that no longer exist, but that isn't like a regular rotation or movement. But part of the work that will come with the future steps of the secondary program review may be to look at creating new programs and specifically looking at areas of the board where opportunities don't exist at this time.
Okay, thank you, Reiko. The next speaker is Elsa KM. Elsa, could you unmute yourself, please? Hi, Elsa. So Elsa, I can see that you're unmuted, and if you could speak, please. Okay, maybe there's a microphone problem. We'll move on to the next speaker, Manikandan Reddy Gowder. Could you please speak?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for this session. One of my question is like, we're talking about multiple specialized programs, like one is native to those schools and one is like localized. We are taking all these surveys. My question would be like, why not all the regular programs have this blend of science and technology? Because many of the parents here are anxious about, the entry criteria. And then me as a parent too are very anxious, like whether my kid would get into science and technology or not. And she would miss, even though she's, some admission criteria or like lack of informations, or some parents are not preparing for it. We don't have that ability and all those things, right? Why not we make a kind of unique program where majority of the students attend the science and technology? That is going to be the future, right? Why don't we create that all programs, some programs where maximum students can attend, and then have these all little things as a separate program?
Well, thank you very much. Reiko, would you like to respond?
Sure. I can talk a little bit about supporting the math and science programming. So I hear two parts of your question about admissions criteria. And so I'm thinking the concern about getting into one of our STEM specialized programs in secondary school, but also making sure that your child is prepared for the application process to post-secondary. And again, what we're trying to do is to help ensure that the application process for secondary schools for the specialized programs that the admissions criteria are very clear, that they're well communicated, that they're consistent for all of, let's say, the math science programs, and that the information is centralized and that the application is centralized. And so we're hearing from the feedback today and from earlier consultation that getting that information to families in a timely fashion, so not just in grade 8, but earlier than that, we are hearing that. But I think it's important to know that science courses are an integral part of the secondary curriculum. Every secondary school has a science department that offers courses from grade 9 all the way through to grade 12 at the university level and the college level. And I've mentioned many of them offer it at the AP level as well, so that even if students are attending and choosing to stay at their local school, they will get all of the education and support that they need to be successful in their post-secondary studies. Science departments are a key part of our schools. And you say that math science, that's the root of the future. And I couldn't agree with you more. And that's why our schools are invested and are putting strong supports in place to make sure that students are getting new and relevant current curriculum in their science programming in all of our secondary schools, in addition to those that have specialized programs.
Thank you, Reiko. We'll do one more speaker and then we'll go to the Q&As. We'll try Elsa KM one more time. Elsa, are you able to speak now? Okay, I can see that Elsa unmuted, but unfortunately, we're not hearing anything. Maybe there's a microphone problem. We're going to go on to Leanne Luong. Leanne, could you unmute yourself, please?
Thank you, Andrew. So my question is about equal opportunity. Now, I understand that there are board-wide specialized programs, but specifically for the local specialized programs that are only for the students in the catchment area, how is that providing any sort of equal opportunity for students who don't live in that catchment area?
Thank you, Leanne. Lorraine, would you like to respond?
Absolutely, and thank you for the question, Leanne. So as I understand it, she's asking the question to say, how is that equal opportunity for those that do not live in the catchment area? Is that correct? That's correct? Okay, so I believe the philosophy, Leanne, is that every school is to be a school of choice that offers programming for the students in their building, in their building. So the district-wide specialized schools would have the obviously admissions criteria and opportunities to attend. But for the local programs, those are being built actually primarily to service the needs of the students that are attending the building. And so I think that's the sort of piece around that. Remember, optional attendance is something that you can apply to other schools to be a part of their school community, you would then have to follow their admissions processes after you're admitted to the building to be a part of that program. So I hope that clarifies it a bit. I'm happy to answer any other questions if it's not clear.
Lorraine, do we foresee there being more local specialized programs in time?
I think we would see that in time. I think because schools would say, you know, this is something, a program we would like to launch or begin or have shifted to better address and meet the needs of our school population of students, as it has come from student interest as well as from staff, as well as from the parent and school council communities. So we definitely see opportunities that schools will say, you know, we'd like to focus in these areas for these reasons. And yes, we can see that happening. But of course, Andrew, it's difficult to know for sure without, you know, seeing the policy in place, the procedure, and how the communities will respond to those pieces. So that's what I would anticipate. And that's fairly early in the process in answering.
Okay, thanks, Lorraine. Going over to the Q&As. Amy.
Thanks, Andrew. So a lot of folks are wondering if you can sort of emphasize the difference between the proposed new specialized programs policy and the optional attendance policy. And moving forward, what that registration process looks like for specialized schools and programs.
Thanks, Amy. Reiko, would you like to respond, please?
I can try. So both of the new policies will now have separate application processes. The way it has currently been done is a single piece of paper where all of those applications are done at once. So this will be separated into two separate applications. Again, for specialized schools and programs, families still have the opportunity to apply for two different options for board-wide or district-wide specialized programs. Registration. So if a student is a successful candidate and is chosen through the process to attend one of our specialized programs in secondary school, the registration is sort of automatically done from their TDSB middle school into the secondary school of choice. The family would simply have to indicate that they were accepting that offer of admission, and they would be transferred just like a student would be transferred from grade 8 to grade 9, whatever secondary school they were choosing to attend. I'm not sure, I'm hoping that sort of answers the question about the registration process. So you wouldn't have to, unless you're coming from outside of the TDSB. If you're coming from outside of the TDSB into the TDSB, you would actually have to go through a formal registration. I'm hoping I've answered the question.
Yeah, so there's many things that are similar between the optional attendance policy that exists now and the direction that we're going with this new policy. Like, people will still be able to apply to two district-wide specialized programs. You'd still be able to apply to two regular programs under optional attendance.
And with the two separate policies, they may not happen at the exact same time. They won't be so directly linked together on a piece of paper as it is now.
Right. And I think one of the improvements in the specialized schools and program policy is having consistency across admission practices. Right now, schools have a lot of independence, and the proposed policy is to provide more alignment and consistency.
Absolutely, and centralized communication, so that those messages going back to families is happening in a consistent manner.
Yeah. Thank you, Reiko. Amy, could we do another Q&A, please?
Yep. So kind of along the lines of what the two of you just said is, will there be a consultation process on the admissions criteria that's developed centrally?
Reiko, would you like to answer that one, or Lorraine, would you like to begin?
I'm happy to begin the answer, and then I can pass it over to Reiko if she has anything to add. And again, the question is regarding the consultation around the admissions processes.
Correct. Yep, Lorraine.
Okay, so so currently the admission processes, I think, I'm just trying to position where I'm starting from here. So the admissions processes in general criteria that we're looking for feedback on at all times. So we have some parents have already given some feedback in previous consultations about how they believe the admissions should be governed. We also have met with community advisory councils, and they've also provided some input in that regard. How to best serve, why is this barrier here, et cetera. Ways in which we should shift and standardize. Over the course of the last year, even during the pandemic, we've mentioned some schools, and there are many others who have shifted those admission processes. So they are constantly being changed and shifted as it relates to following best practices in the area of access for students, particularly with a focus that's galvanized in equity and our multi-year strategic plan. What I'm hearing the question saying as well is, can the parents be involved in the admissions for particular schools is what I'm hearing. And I just want to make sure, Amy, I see you. Can you?
Yep.
Yeah, that's.
Families were wondering, so as the policy and I guess moving to procedures works to create the standardized admissions process and guidelines for schools, will feedback be additionally considered from families?
Right. And so I would say that that's as it relates to the procedural part of pieces, our procedures operationalize sort of the policy and look at best practices, and that's something that we develop certainly with the input of the public as we're getting tonight. So if you'd like to mention that, I would certainly encourage you to highlight that on the survey that you fill in, to give your input and to let it be known you think these things should be considered. And then once those are framed, we do standardized admissions processes will help and be communicated to all so that everybody knows what the admissions practices are that we're following. And we're really looking at doing that because it's also about helping the policy become as consistently applied throughout the district. So the Toronto District School Board would have standardized admissions processes for schools, right? Particularly specialized schools. That's my start at the answer, and Rachel, I'll pass it over to you.
I'm just going to take this opportunity to plug the feedback survey, because there actually are specific questions about this on the feedback survey. So now is your opportunity to provide some of that information that you have based on your own experiences and based on your thoughts about how we would set these admissions criteria. And the one other piece of consultation that will happen will be working with folks who have worked in the schools, have worked in the programs, but also from our equity and human rights departments within the board, and in taking their leadership and direction and working with staff who will help to guide this process. This will not be one person setting random criteria. There will be a lot of professional consultation in developing this.
And I would also add Urban Indigenous Center and gender-based violence, just so that some of the other groups are also named and have always been part of those dialogues. Just thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lorraine and Reiko. And we'll do one more Q&A and then we're back to the speakers list. Amy?
Thanks, Andrew. While we're on the optional attendance policy, some families have wondered about if children who live out of Toronto can apply to TDSB through optional attendance, and also the rationale for the 2 school or program choice on the proposed specialized school policy.
Thanks, Amy. Reiko, would you like to respond?
So I can start by saying people who live outside of Toronto, so not with an M postal code, they can apply for admission in schools in Toronto through optional attendance. But part of the lottery priorities does set students who are residing in Toronto at a higher priority than those who live outside of Toronto. So if a school has space available, they have a certain number of seats that they can allocate through optional attendance. If there are spaces after considering students in Toronto, then yes, students outside of Toronto can gain access.
And is there a thought behind why it's limited to 2?
I think this is going to be sort of more my own personal opinion, and this is not grounded in the work that's been done. So I'm just going to say that I think we realize that there's a limited number of spaces that are available, and the processes that have existed where each school has worked independently. When students would apply to more than 2, they might be taking more than their fair share of opportunities away from others. So trying to leave some element of choice, but also making sure that opportunities exist for as many students as possible. Lorraine, did you want to add to that?
I would just add, Reiko, that in the previous consultation, there was a desire to even reduce it to 1. And there was a feeling that, really we probably need to keep it at 2. And that's directly as a result of the input that was provided from the public and others in that sort of consideration. And with the focus of every school being, a viable school, our local school, we want to certainly encourage students to go to schools that are in their area that they can access, whether by walking or local public transit, and they don't have to commute. So part of the vision of the larger, broader scope is to ensure that we create viable local schools, because they are viable local schools. And so perhaps that's also part of what I'd like to add to the dialogue and the explanation about the 2, and also the philosophy as it relates to secondary review. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine and Reiko. We're back to the speakers list. Marang Sabap, could you please speak? Marang, can you unmute?
Hi, good evening.
Hello.
Hi, can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Oh, thank you. Good evening. I just have 2 questions regarding the policy. I know Lorraine talked about the policy being looking at, admitting more kids from marginalized students so they can have more opportunities. And I wanted to find out about the criteria that will be used for those kids, because you're all, some of the parents has been talking about the criteria, what it will entail. But my concern more is into the marginalized kids, because they're more underrepresented, as she mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And another question that I wanted to ask was, I know someone asked about it on the Q&As, because this is a revised policies, or these are new implementations that you guys have been doing, and the research and so on. How come you do not look into students that are in alternative schools to give them an opportunities to expand in their education? Because I would think some of the students that are in alternative schools, it's not like they're not smart enough to be able to excel and be given chances in this opportunity in these schools. I remember when my son was when I was in middle school, and at one point they had an issue at school, and he was put in alternative school. And when he went to high school at Don Mills Collegiate, he was placed in arts because he's very good in arts. And because the principal could see his talent, and she encouraged him to be able to go in that route, but that's some time ago. So now it's just a question, because I'm looking at this beautiful policy, because I read it, I'm in policy, and I think you guys can do better in that line.
That's a very interesting comment about alternative schools. I'm trying to understand what you might be suggesting. You think alternative schools should be referenced or tied into the specialized schools and program policy?
I think that it has to be maybe a part of them. I think because when we do policies, we look at them, how we can be able to improve a certain issue. And then we can be able to have recommendations of how can they be accommodated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm just throwing it out there because I know how a lot of times the kids that are in alternative schools, they've always been looked at a certain way. And, some schools and some teachers, even some students, when they look at them, they don't think they fit in as them. They're not like the same students coming from the same, they're not learning the same things in education.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for that comment. I don't think we have a response on the alternative schools right now. I think you've given us food for thought, but you did ask a question about admission criteria as it applies to the marginalized groups of students. And Lorraine, could you respond, please?
Absolutely, Andrew. And thanks for the question again. And there are many marginalized groups that we are focusing on. We certainly want to hear Indigenous voice. We have mentioned some references in the slide. We also would want to add the 2S LGBTQ plus community as well. And these are groups that have been many times underserved. And I think we want to focus on our groups of students to ensure that their admission and their considerations are correct. So we're looking into that. This is what we're going to be doing, and our procedures will more adequately speak to that. And I guess I just want to thank you for the question, because it helps us to understand that this is on your minds as well as on ours. And I would ask that if you have any specific recommendations around what we should be considering and how that might need to be thoughtfully done, please just add it to the survey that is due on December 17th, where you can actually provide a bit more specific voice for that for us to hear. All of this information is collated and tabulated, put together in a final report, but the policy pieces will relate to the policy, and the procedure pieces we will certainly apply to the procedures that are also going to be developed in response to the policy, again, provided that it is approved and goes through the cycle. So thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. Back to the speakers list. The next speaker is Regine Hung. Regine, could you unmute yourself, please?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah, so thank you for holding the consultation. I just want to make some comments and questions. I think it's important to differentiate equity and equality. And a lot of the procedures or policies that we're talking about here really address to equality, but not that much on the equity. I think equity is something that we should be all fully, support. But the real equity really promotes that everyone has the chance to reach their full potential, but in their own path, in their own speed. At the moment, what I'm seeing in the trend in TDSB, for example, in the case of Ursula Franklin, or now we're seeing in AP program, completely removing those assessments at the admission, and relying solely on lottery is a simple probabilistic approach. I think that helps with the equality, but it doesn't not necessarily help with the equity, because at the same time, you significantly can diminish the potential of what the specialized program can really provide for individual students and as a whole. So my question then is, how does TDSB ensure that the specialized program can continue to nurture world-class engineers, artists, and athletes or scientists from Canada?
Thank you for the question, Regine. Lorraine, would you like to respond, please?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I think oftentimes we, as systems change, I think it's important that we clarify that when we provide opportunities to underserved communities, we are also right-sizing what has historically been a problematic practice that we need to correct. I do hear the voice of the speaker that she was asking about how do we ensure that other people have opportunities to access. And I think that's what we're trying to do. We are providing access by ensuring that the barriers which have systemically created problems for underserved communities in accessing wonderful programs that we have are removed. And the reason for that is because we recognize as we grow as a system, as we grow with greater knowledge, that the practices disadvantage particular groups of students. And for that, we need to interrupt that practice and be responsive. And so some of the information that was shared in one of the slides is actually data that we have collected, and the Toronto District School Board is fairly strong at collecting and recognizing information and looking at systems that show disparity and recognize about how we can make that better. So what I want to say to the person who spoke, I'm sorry, I just lost her name on the list, but is I want to recognize that many Canadians that are here have wonderful talents and opportunities, and they have much to give and much to learn, and they want to have access just like all other students. And I think what we're saying is, let's provide the access in a way that does not contribute to the systemic oppressive structures that have long existed in marginalizing those communities. And I think that's the response that we have. I think it's the work that's being done in a very thoughtful, intentional way. And I think it's also going to recognize and profile a multiplicity of voices and people in education in a way that honors our commitments within the multi-year strategic plan. I'm not sure if that answers the question or that's what the speaker was expecting to hear. I don't know, because I was just trying to answer, but I do want to say that it is our hope that by right-sizing schools and by making these shifts, that more students will have access to rich programs and more students will be able to optimize and become the best they can be. So that's what I would answer, Andrew. So thank you for the opportunity to respond to that.
Thank you, Lorraine. We're going to do one more speaker and then we're going to go to Q&As. There are many Q&As coming in, and I just want people to know that they are being recorded and there will be written answers to those questions, and they'll be posted on the board's website later on. Back to the speakers list, Bethune Whiston. Bethune, can you unmute yourself, please?
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for doing this. It's very, very interesting. I just wanted to say that I believe in flexibility and variety in the offerings available. And one of the programs that seems to be fairly unique, although I only have one child, and she is in the Claude Watson Arts Program at Earl Hague, it does seem to be fairly unique. It's a big school that allows people with arts talents to also pursue a lot of good educational programs that are more intellectual than artistic, the two sides of the brain. And she's half Persian and half, Scottish English kind of mix. I think it would be a shame if it's a possibility that this program would be moved out of Earl Hague. But I don't know if that's in consideration or not.
Well, thank you for those positive comments about the Claude Watson program. We don't have any comments to make right now about what's going to happen to district-wide and local programs that exist right now. We're at the policy stage. So we can't, unfortunately, forecast right now what could happen at Earl Hague and Claude Watson. But thank you for those comments, Bethune. Moving on to the Q&A, Amy.
Thanks, Andrew. Lorraine spoke a little bit about this, but we just have a few more questions for maybe a little bit more details. So how do we ensure that the students from disadvantaged neighborhoods will have access in the full range to these specialization or specialized schools and programs? And how are we ensuring that students with special education needs are able to access the programs and schools, specialized programs and schools, sorry.
Thank you.
I was going to say, over to you, Lorraine.
Thanks, Andrew. And I'll start, and I'm certainly happy to share with Reiko if she has anything to add. I think the admissions practices are the first step of what we're looking at. How do we structure admissions practices in a way that can be exclusive for students who do not have the means, opportunities, the finances, although they're highly skilled, to enter into a school. And so we want to make sure that those types of systemic pieces are removed. How are we going to do that? By having consultations with our school leaders and by working in collaboration with our staff departments to say, how do we best serve the multitude of interests from students that we serve, like the multitude of people that we serve. So I think that those shifts and changes in the admission practices will be quite helpful. I would like to say that some of our art schools have already made shifts in their own practices as a result of their own choices to say, we'd like to look at this a little differently and create opportunities for more students, different types of students, to have access to a rich and wholesome arts-based program. So I just want to mention that. The second part of the question that Amy asked was with regards to how are we going to do that? Like, how are we going to serve the students? If you could just repeat that second part. I apologize for having to ask you to do this, but it's
Okay.
we're trying to process at the same time. Thanks.
So I think you captured the first part. The second part was more about students with special education needs and how we are ensuring that these students have access to specialized schools and programs.
And thank you for that, Amy. And I knew that the last part was just as important as the first part. So I would like to just add that students with exceptionality are our students. Students with exceptionality are our students. They, sorry, it sounds tongue-tied there. They are our students, and we want to ensure that students with exceptionality have access. And we know that we're not, when we talk about students with exceptionality, what I'm hearing is we're not speaking really about students who are identified as gifted, because oftentimes, as was mentioned in the slideshow, the opportunities for students who are gifted may be the same as others, right? But what I'd like to say is, what I'm hearing is, how do we service students with exceptionalities, and how do they have opportunities so that are not gifted? And I think this is what we are looking at, which is the disparities that we mentioned in one of the slides. How do we best support students? And I think it really draws back down to the admission practices. Are we putting practices in place that create barriers for students with exceptionality? Are we asking for documentation and requirements that create barriers? And I think the word barrier is a big one. And I think we want to be responsive to ensure that all of our students have access, racialized students, underserved students, students with exceptionality who are not gifted, have access to specialized schools and programs. I pass it over to Reiko at this time. Thank you.
A couple of points that I just wanted to add. I think looking at how we're going to better promote and make students and families aware of specialized programs that might be of interest to students is a key piece of this. We can't rely solely on teachers to identify students in grades 7 and 8 who may have an aptitude or an interest or a passion. While that may serve some students, it doesn't serve all of our students. So making sure that families have that information in a timely fashion so that they can pursue this, and that we have supports in place to facilitate the application process. And as Lorraine has mentioned, setting admissions criteria that are as barrier-free and accessible as possible. And I think when we want to make sure that we are welcoming students with special education needs into our specialized programs, part of the work that we will be doing is ensuring that the programming in specialized schools and programs makes space for students who are wishing to take learning strategies or GLE class, who are going to require the accommodations that are outlined in their IEPs. And that is clearly expressed so that students know that they are welcome and will be supported in the programs that they're choosing.
Thank you, Lorraine and Reiko. We've got 6 people who are on the speakers list. We're going to try to move through them quickly. Jonathan Wu, could you please unmute yourself?
Thank you. My question is, what criteria will be used to determine if a program should be considered a local program or a board-wide program? I remember one of the presenters earlier mentioned how schools that are like at or near capacity are more likely to change into a local program so it could accommodate the community better. But what sort of criteria are you guys looking at to make these decisions?
Thanks, Jonathan. Reiko, would you like to respond, please?
Sure, I can start, and you may have other insight to add. So Jonathan, thanks for the question. Again, the criteria have not been set yet, but some of the parameters and some of the factors that are going to be considered, you've mentioned how full a school is, whether a student is, and I wouldn't say near capacity. We have some schools that are well over capacity. And so making sure that schools are able to support the needs of their local students is an important factor. That's what schools have to be able to do. And so that might be one consideration. Also ensuring that students who live in the local catchment area also have access to that specialized program. It is their local school, and they should have a way to access that as well. Also looking at what other area supports and programs are available to students. So those are a few of the considerations, some of which were mentioned in the presentation. And I'm not sure, Andrew, if there was other pieces from planning that you wanted to add to that.
Thanks, Reiko. I do believe that one of the major criteria will be how much space is available in the building. And if it is an overutilized building with portables on site, then that is not a good place to admit students who live outside of the school's boundary. That's not a good place to introduce a district-wide program. So if there's sufficient students who are interested in an area of focus and it's a full school, then it's more likely to be established as a local specialized program. So thank you for that, Reiko, and thank you, Jonathan, for the question. Moving on to Pankaj Patel. Pankaj, could you please speak? So Pankaj, you would need to unmute yourself. Okay, might be a microphone problem. So we're going to move on to Fuzia Mosharraf. Oh, Fuzia just left. Violet Chen. Violet Chen.
Hello, I have a question. So I have two questions actually. The first question, when you say a local special program, like how local is local? For example, let's take high Claude Watson as an example. So if Claude Watson becomes a local school, and then like how do you define a local special program? And if there's a local special program, so do we still need to apply the optional attendance? And if we do need to apply optional attendance, is this a guarantee or not? If we still need to go through the applying the optional attendance for a specialized program and we are not guaranteed, and why is this new policy bringing more equality compared with the existing one? That's my question one. My question two is that I heard you mention that you're trying to standardize the process of application to eliminate the current inconsistency among the application criteria. But the arts program criteria, it's pretty much maybe like different than math or sports. And how do you standardize it? That's my two questions.
Okay, thanks, Violet. So the first question is about a local specialized program and how is admission impacted when a program is established as a local specialized program? So it would be the schools, the host school's regular program boundary. That now becomes the boundary for the local specialized program. So there's not going to be a separate boundary that's wider than the regular program boundary. It will be the regular program boundary that determines who's eligible to get into the local specialized program. Now, if the host school happens to have space available, then it is possible that people who reside outside of the school's regular program boundary could apply to the school. But if the school is full, if it's overutilized with portables on site, for example, then that local specialized program is going to be closed to anybody who lives outside of the boundary, and it's only people who have an address in the regular program boundary who would be able to apply. The second question was about the standardizing of the admission criteria, and that admission criteria might look different for an arts program as compared to a science, technology, math program. Reiko, would you like to comment on that?
Absolutely, Andrew, thanks. I think the piece about standardization is that similar types of programs, so the math, science, technology, STEM programs would have a standard set of criteria and application that would be different than, say, all of the arts-focused programs. So it wouldn't be standard for every single specialized program, but based on the type of specialized program, because you're absolutely right, you'd be looking for a very different skill set for those different types of programs.
Okay, thanks, Reiko. So we have 2 people left to speak, and we need about 5 minutes to wrap up the presentation and go through the next steps. So Alice Coe, could you please speak?
Oh, hi, Andrew. Thanks for your time. I have a quick question regarding my 2 children who are currently on the specialized program on the optional attendancy, and they're currently in grade 9 and 11. So with this new policy coming in, is there any impact on the current student?
Thank you for the question, Alice. So Lorraine had outlined timelines that the policy is under review now to be approved in the early part of 2022, and then the new procedures will take effect beginning of the September 22 school year for people applying for admission to September of 23. So people who are already in programs now, I don't believe are going to be impacted by the policy. I can see Reiko nodding. Reiko, would you like to add anything?
That's exactly it. This would only impact future grades applying into programs. Students who are already in a program would be in that program until they graduated or completed the program.
Okay, thank you for that, Reiko. Violet, was that you who just spoke?
Yes, I just want to have a follow-up question. Like you mentioned that the local school, if the optional attendance is closed, then people who does not live in this catchment area will not have the opportunity to apply. Is that correct?
So people who live in the school's attendance area, would they be able to apply to the local specialized program?
People who live out of the the catchment area.
Right. That is correct. If the school is very full and they live outside of the regular program boundary and they're applying to a local specialized program, if it's full, the school, then they wouldn't be able to get admission.
So then my question is that if my local homeschool does not have any arts program and Claude Warson, like board-wide arts program, is closed, do I have the opportunity to go to a specialized arts program if none of the local school optional attendance is open?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So there's likely to be still district-wide program offerings. It's not like all the programs are going to become local. So there still are going to be district-wide offerings.
Okay, so like for arts, math, sports, there's always going to be one sport-wide program that's going to be offered.
Yeah, at this point, we can't say what program areas they're going to be in, but yes, there always will be district-wide options available.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Violet.
Andrew, can I just add one thing about local
Sure.
specialized programs and schools that are closed to optional attendance? There may be a school that is already closed to optional attendance. I might think of Riverdale Collegiate. They might want to start a local specialized program. I know they have a focus on Indigenous languages and Indigenous studies. They may at some point turn that into a local specialized program that would just be available for the students who attended the school. So there is another perspective to this, that a school that is already closed may want to start a local specialized program for their local students.
Great, thank you for sharing that, Reiko. Fuzia Musharraf, can you unmute yourself, please?
Yeah,
Fuzia?
hi.
Hi.
So my question would be like, what will be the difference between the local specialized program and district specialized program in terms of the program? Suppose if they're offering STEM programs in district and STEM programs in local, what will be the main difference be other than the admission criteria?
Great, thanks, Fuzia.
Is there a difference in the contents or in subjects, or like what is the main difference?
Yep, thank you. Reiko, could you respond, please?
Sure. So Fuzia, there's already differences in the course offerings and the programs in, let's say, the different math, science, technology schools. There are some schools that are offering these programs that have a robotics program simply because that's part of the school offerings, whereas other math science programs don't have that. They have another area of focus. So I don't think it's going to be prescribed that they will be exactly the same. There already are differences based on the nature of the schools, the facilities, and the programs that they're able to offer. They would have a focus. They would have a certain number of courses that are focused on their area. So whether it's math, science, and technology, that would be consistent. But the specific courses, there would still be variability based on the schools.
Thanks, Reiko. So there's no more people on the speakers list. We're at 9:02. We have about 5 minutes left to do in the presentation. So thank you very much for everyone who spoke and everyone who wrote into the Q&A. The Q&As are being recorded and there'll be written responses posted on the website later. Lorraine, we're turning it over to you.
Thank you so much, Andrew and team, for the excellent work in leading us through the Q&A this evening. Just in way of reminder, tonight, this was our first consultation. I just want you to know that the next time that we're working this is on Monday, November 22nd. There'll be 2 sessions, 1 to 3, and then again from 7 to 9. Please advise your community, please share with them the links. Please let people know that they can get their questions answered, because we'd love to see more people participating on Monday evening, as we hope to receive much feedback from the public on this draft policy. Next slide, please. So for next steps, we're encouraging you to visit our website. You may have seen this information on the TDSB landing or homepage. You may have also received Twitter updates if you're following us at TDSB. And so please do that if you haven't already thought about that. But of course, it's asking you and giving information about the consultations, how to register, and more specifically, our email address, should you wish to ask more specific questions or to share your thoughts, because you may not have had an opportunity to this evening. Or maybe this is the first time you're hearing about this richness and you'd like to think about it and then send us an email. Please feel free to do that. We're here to listen, and you have up until December the 17th to do that. Next slide, please. One of the website pages we really want to ensure everyone knows about is our specialized schools and programs policy page. On this page, you'll see 2 videos, as well as much of the information that we've already shared with you. Just a reminder that on the website, you can find the link for the feedback survey. That survey is available in 18 languages. And the survey is open until December the 17th. And if you would like to receive a paper copy or know of somebody who would like to receive a paper copy, you can do that by going to your child's school and making that request. Next slide, please. And our final slide for the evening speaks about the next steps in the policy. And what you can see here is that the public consultation surveys close on December 17th. And as we mentioned, we'll be doing revisions to the draft policy, and that will be December, January, of course. And then in the winter cycle, we'll be submitting a final staff report to the Governance Policy Committee, GPC, and to the Board of Trustees for decision-making. So you want to stay connected to the Twitter handle so that you can get updates as to when that goes to GPC, and we'd be pleased to see you there and to, again, hear your voice. Also, the policy and the associated procedures are in place, will be in place for September 2022, with the proviso that everything is accepted, subject to the approval of the board. I just want to thank everybody again for participating. Next slide, please. I also want to particularly thank again our community advisory committees that gave us great feedback in how to structure this evening. If you have feedback for us, please feel free to leave a comment. Please recognize that the Q&A will be responded to. And I just want to thank you for spending an evening with us this evening. I know that many of you have very busy lives, but we really value your feedback, especially this evening around this policy. If you haven't already been able to look at the chat and connect to the links, please make sure you grab those before you leave tonight. Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you so much.